You've seen this name your whole life. It's stamped on the side of a Ford truck, burned into leather, printed on the back window of trucks from Laredo to Lubbock. The King Ranch. Most people think it's just a brand, a name on a truck. It is not. It is a real place. One of the largest privately owned pieces of land in the United States, 825,000 acres of South Texas. Bigger than the entire state of Rhode Island. One family has held it for more than 170 years. And here is the part almost nobody knows. No amount of money has ever been able to buy a single acre of it. In America, almost everything is for sale. Every piece of land has a price if you're willing to pay it. But there are a handful of places where that simply isn't true. Empires of land, held by single families for over a century, that money will never touch. The King Ranch is the most famous of them. To understand how that's even possible, you have to go back to a boy who arrived in Texas with nothing. The name is everywhere. On the side of a pickup, burned into a saddle. But the real King Ranch is not a logo or a legend. It is a living country, a world unto itself, 825,000 acres of South Texas brush and grass, stretching farther than the eye can see, larger than the state of Rhode Island. For more than a century and a half, the gates have never truly opened to outsiders, no matter what they offered. This is not a story about a price tag. It is about how a piece of America became unsellable. Richard King was born in New York City in 1824, the son of Irish immigrants who had nothing to their name. At 9, he was indentured to a jeweler, a boy bound to a future he did not choose. He ran away, stowed himself aboard a steamboat, and was caught, then kept as a cabin boy. By 16, he was piloting riverboats along the southern waterways, learning every bend of the Rio Grande. The river made him sharp, restless, hungry for more than wages. War and commerce brought him to Texas, where he partnered with Mifflin Kennedy. Together they ran steamboats, moved cotton and cattle, and built a fortune on grit and risk. But money alone did not make the King Ranch. In 1853, King and his partner Gideon Lewis bought the Rincon de Santa Gertrudis Grant, 15,500 acres of wild empty land for $300. The next year they doubled down, adding a larger grant along the same creek. The ranch's boundaries began to take shape, but the land was empty, and King understood that land without people was just a map. Drought struck northern Mexico in 1854. In the town of Cruilas, families watched their cattle die and their fields turn to dust. King rode south, bought what little livestock was left, and saw the desperation in the faces of those left behind. He offered them a new life, move north, work for him, and become part of something permanent. Dozens of families took the gamble, crossing the border, leaving everything behind. They became Los Canenos, the King's people, and the heart of the ranch. Los Canenos were not just laborers. They built the fences, broke the wild horses, drove cattle across rivers and prairies. They lived in ranch villages, raised families, and passed down stories in Spanish and English. Over generations, the Canenos became as much a part of the ranch as the land itself. Their descendants still live and work on the King Ranch today, 7 generations later. The roots run deeper than any fence post. Richard King's vision was simple and absolute: buy land and never sell. Family lore says that Robert E. Lee himself, passing through Texas, told King to buy all the land you can and never sell it. King took it to heart. When he died in 1885, his will forbade the sale of even a single square foot. His wife Henrietta King carried that commandment forward, holding the ranch together through drought, war, and the death of her children. The ranch passed to their daughter Alice and her husband Robert Kleberg, and through them to the Kleberg line, who still hold it in trust. The rules are strict. The land can only change hands if every family member agrees. None ever have. The King Ranch is not just a relic, it is a working empire, a place of invention and endurance. In 1933, the family signed a lease with Humble Oil, now ExxonMobil, that brought a river of royalty checks, enough to weather the leanest years. But oil was never the only legacy. The ranch became famous for its cattle, breeding the Santa Gertrudis line, a tough red heat-resistant breed recognized by the USDA in 1940. Horses, too. Old Sorrel, the foundation sire purchased in 1915, stands behind nearly every King Ranch quarter horse alive today. The brand means something because the bloodlines are real. Other ranches have come and gone. The Waggoner, the XIT, and the 4.6s were eventually sold, divided, or lost to time. The King Ranch endures because it is more than an asset. It is a world built on memory, loyalty, and promise. The same families who crossed the border in 1854 still ride out at dawn, still gather at the same chapels, still call this place home. Money can buy almost anything in America, but it cannot buy the roots that hold a land empire together. If you know of another ranch where the land and its people have stayed inseparable, tell us in the comments. In the end, it's not the acres that matter most. It's the roots that cannot be pulled. A name carved into Texas dirt, the Waggoner Ranch once sprawled across more than 500,000 acres, its boundaries drifting past the horizon. Dan Waggoner began the empire in 1849, driving cattle through unsettled country and laying claim to land with every passing season. The size alone was staggering, but it was the family's ambition that made the ranch famous, herds numbering in the tens of thousands, oil wells punching through the prairie, fortunes built and spent in a single lifetime. But the Waggoner legacy was never as solid as it looked from a distance. Inside the family, lines were drawn early. Each generation added heirs, and with each new branch, the trust that held the land grew more tangled. By the mid-20th century, the ranch was less a kingdom than a chessboard. Siblings and cousins squared off in courtrooms, contesting wills and boundaries, each convinced their claim was the true inheritance. Lawsuits dragged on for decades, outlasting the oldest hands and draining the patience of every new heir. The land itself became the battleground. Unlike the King Ranch, where unity held the gates shut, the Waggoner Trust allowed for division if the family could not agree. That legal crack widened with every dispute, until finally, in 2016, the ranch was sold for $725 million. The empire that had survived drought, boom, and bust could not survive the strain from within. The Waggoner story is a caution. Even the greatest acreage can be lost, not by outsiders, but by the slow fracture of inheritance turned to rivalry. A fence line running straight to the horizon, posts vanishing into the dust. This is the image most people carry of the XIT Ranch. For a time, it was more than just a ranch, it was an empire of grass. 3 million acres stitched across the Texas Panhandle, born not from a family's ambition, but from a deal struck in the halls of government. In 1879, Texas faced a problem. The old state capitol in Austin had burned, and a new one would cost more than the Treasury could spare. The solution was audacious, a swap. 3 million acres of public land were traded for the promise of a new Capitol building. British and Chicago investors took the deal, forming the Capitol Syndicate and laying claim to a kingdom of prairie that would become the XIT. Unlike the King or Waggoner ranches, the XIT was never meant to last. Its bones were transactional, not generational. Cattle grazed where buffalo had thundered. Cowboys rode for wages, not for legacy. The syndicate's charter pointed always toward liquidation. Acquire, improve, and when the time came, sell. For a few decades, the XIT ran the largest herd in the world, branding tens of thousands of calves each spring and shipping beef to distant cities. But the logic of the deal was inescapable. Investors wanted returns. Fencing costs soared, cattle prices fell, and the pressure to break up the land mounted year by year. By 1905, the slow unraveling began. Parcels were surveyed, mapped, and sold off to settlers and speculators. By 1912, the XIT existed only in memory and on old maps. The Land for Capital Trade had built a monument in Austin, but it had carried the seeds of its own ending. The XIT's scale was monumental, but its roots were shallow, no family, no binding promise, only the arithmetic of profit and dispersal. In the end, the XIT proved that even the grandest empire can be designed to disappear. A red-hot iron 4/6 burned into hide. This is the image that lingers in the American mind. The 4/6 Ranch, or the 6666, is as much a legend as a place. Its brand stamped on quarter horses, cattle, and the dreams of Texas. Samuel Burke Burnett, the man behind the myth, started with 100 head of cattle and a vision that outlasted drought, war, and the shifting fortunes of the plains. The brand, born not from a lucky poker hand but from the first herd he raised, became a banner of quality and pride. For more than 150 years, the 4/6's name carried weight far beyond its fences, spoken in auction barns, whispered in rodeo chutes, worn on belt buckles from Amarillo to Abilene. But even the strongest brand cannot hold back time. The 4/6's was never sealed by a trust or a family vow. Its roots ran deep, but not deep enough to resist the logic of the market. In 2021, the ranch changed hands for the first time since 1870. Taylor Sheridan, a filmmaker with Texas blood and Hollywood reach, led a group that bought all 260,000 acres, 3 divisions, every pasture, every windmill, every mile of fence. The deal made headlines, but the land itself did not change. The cattle still graze, the horses still run, and the brand still burns. Yet something essential shifted, the proof that even a name known to every rancher in the state can be bought, if the price is right and the family is ready. The 4/6 shows that legend alone cannot freeze a land empire in place. Recognition is not the same as permanence. In the end, the land moves on, and only the story remains. A river of grass, broken by shadowed ridges and silent streams. This is Vermejo. Its name rarely appears in the headlines, yet it holds more ground than many kingdoms. Nearly 560,000 acres stretch across northern New Mexico and into Colorado. A private domain whose boundaries were drawn not in a single bold stroke, but through patient accumulation and quiet resolve. There are no tales of a founder's glory or courtroom drama here. Vermejo's endurance is measured in decades of steady stewardship, not in the flash of a public sale or the spectacle of a family feud. Since 1996, the land has been held by Turner Enterprises, the legacy of Ted Turner's vision for conservation and continuity. The ranch is not a relic locked away, but a living landscape, managed for wildlife, open to guests, and protected by conservation easements that promise the grass will outlast any one owner. Elk graze the meadows where cattle once roamed, and bison move through the high country, reminders that permanence can be built not on legend, but on restraint. Vermejo's story is one of muted power, a land empire that resists the market's pull not through myth or mandate, but through the slow, deliberate act of holding on. Here, the roots are not loud. They run deep, and they hold. A line of cottonwoods marks the edge of Palo Duro Canyon, where the XIT Ranch took root in the high plains. Here, the story is not about a single founder or a legendary brand. It is about the quiet work of families who never left. Charles Goodnight and John Adair staked their claim in 1876, carving a cattle range out of wild country. Goodnight's name became legend, but the land itself slipped from the headlines and settled into the hands of his descendants, generation after generation, each one learning the rhythms of grass, drought, and storm. The XIT is not a monument or a museum. It is a working ranch, still run by the Goodnight Adair line, still passing decisions and responsibility from parent to child. No oil boom, no court battle, no public auction ever forced their hand. The acreage, over 200,000 by most counts, remains intact because the family refused to see it as a commodity. Stewardship is not a slogan here, it is a daily practice, a duty handed down in the same way as a saddle or a story. The land endures not because it is locked away, but because it is lived on, worked, and carried forward by those who claim it as home. In the American story of land empires, the JA stands for endurance by presence, not by price. A shadow falls where the Sanchez Navarro estate once stretched, its boundaries lost to memory and decree. In the mid-1800s, this was the largest private landholding in the Americas. Over 16 million acres of desert, mountain, and grassland, a domain so vast it dwarfed every Texas ranch combined. Generations of the Sanchez Navarro family ruled this expanse from fortified haciendas, their power woven into the fabric of northern Mexico. Sheep and cattle grazed by the tens of thousands, watered by cisterns dug against relentless drought. But no family, no fortune, could outlast the storm that swept through in the wake of Mexico's reform wars. In 1866, a single government order shattered the estate. Confiscation was not a sale, not a feud, not a slow erosion. It was erasure. The land was seized, divided, and handed out to officers, settlers, and strangers. Within a decade, the Sanchez Navarro name was stripped from the map, its empire scattered to the winds, its legacy reduced to a collection of ruins and archival records. Nothing remained to pass down. No trust, no brand, no unbroken chain of hands. Where once a dynasty stood, only fragments endure. In the American story of land empires, this is the fate beyond loss, disappearance without inheritance, a kingdom dissolved by the force of history itself. A ranch is just land until roots claim it, until stories, sweat, and loyalty make it untouchable. Kings rise from stowaway to empire builder, the lineage of Los Canenos, the legacy of Lee's warning. These are threads money can't buy or break. Most land empires fade. King Ranch endures because inheritance runs deeper than oil or cattle. Share your stories of forgotten dynasties below. Subscribe for more true American legends.